And so it was just few reflections. It's not a speech at all. I was asked to make some point for 10 minutes, and it will not be longer than 10 minutes. The famous British social theorist and philosopher Ernst Gellner claimed that civil society cannot be developed within Islam because of Muslim exclusivist favorizing of only one religion and sacralization of the religious view, which, according to him, makes pluralism impossible. Like many others among the modern Western theorists, he also argues that the main conditions for civil society are democratic pluralism and individualization of human rights and freedom. This is truth the modern civil society which emerged within the Western societies. My goal now is not to discuss whether Islam allows or closes for the development of democracy and individual rights, for it's a very broad theme, and because neither Islam nor democracy are monolithic sides. My goal is rather to draw attention to some aspects of Muslim political life, historically and currently, which can throw light on possibilities of civil society and secularism in a Muslim society. Firstly, let me say that civil society, understood as a society in which people organize their lives without direct intervention from the state or without an exclusive government by a religious power, is not unknown in Islamic history. A history where the ulama, and not a central power, had a crucial role in people's everyday life. They had a key role not only in religious life, but also in other spheres like education, social and economic life. And this is a very known phenomenon from Muslim history. The Indonesian philosopher and political theorist Majid Nurkulish, known as Chuck Noor, perceived thus the first Muslim community, the contract society established in Medina by Prophet Muhammad, as an example of pre-modern civil society. Religion, particularly Islam, was an important but not the only determining factor for organizing of this society. The old Arabic tribe traditions had a very significant role. Nurkulish was interested in developing a civil society in Indonesia, and he found inspiration in both the history of Islam, including Medina society, and modern Western history. He found it useful to combine the ideas of Islamic political theory with the modern Western theory of civil society and ideas of civil religion, found, for example, in Cook's and Bella, and their theories on American civil religion as a common cross-ethnical form of ideology integrating economic, social and religious elements. And he managed, together with other reform-oriented Indonesian intellectuals and politicians, to institutionalize the idea of civil society in Indonesia. The Indonesian government introduced into its constitution a document called Pancasila in 1984, which contains 5 elements confirming national identity, solidarity, social justice and democracy, and which are acceptable for all ethnic and religious groups. It should be mentioned that Nurkulish has made himself remarkable by his claim that secularization as a process of rational interpretation and not as an ideology may be a direct consequence of the doctrine of Tawhid. This is very radical and unexpected claim from Muslim side, but Nurkulish argumentations are quite logical. If the goal for Muslims is to maintain separation between the absolute and the relative, between the divine and the human, then this means that every interpretation must be regarded as secular in its nature. And if the call for ijtihad is to realize Khalif's role that relates to this word, that it means to be engaged with the secular social conditions. I'm referring to Indonesia, the largest Muslim community, as a good example of tackling the issue of religious pluralism, democracy and civil society from an Islamic perspective. But democracy is, as Jon mentioned, taking over in many Muslim countries. Moving from the east to the west and relating to the main theme of our seminar, I can say following. The conditions and challenges for Muslims living as minorities in the West are different. Of course, they are also facing religious pluralism, but they are experiencing various forms of civil society as an everyday reality. And they are experiencing secularism as a basic condition. Accumulation of experience, intensifications of relations with others, and extension of knowledge also leads to the change of one's understanding of the world. As Abdul Karim Soroush pointed out, the main issue in this context is to understand the relationship between the religious and not religious, to think critically about how we define the boundary between those two areas. According to him, one can not talk about the permanent boundary between religion and non-religion, and therefore one can talk about a fixed frame of the religious or the secular. Returning to the main theme, the Arab Spring, and reflections of its implications, it may note that the religious and the secular in this sense were put in a special context. Religious and secular people were, in their struggle against dictatorship, on the same side. They probably didn't have the same motivations to engage themselves in the revolution. Obviously, they also have different views on the role of religion in the post-revolution period, but they can partially agree on framework for political cooperation and the goal of social justice. And the common point is that neither one can deny the new political and social conditions, the role of media, internet, and internet-based network for development of the people's socio-political consciousness and the change of social reality. Precisely because of the new modern form of communication and accessibility of information, it is now impossible to maintain a monopoly on religion interpretations and to maintain political censorship where it came to the social life. The Arab Spring has confirmed this in a convincing manner, and at the same time it has opened up a new understanding of the social dynamism in modern society and meaning of the establishment of social justice. I didn't have much time to elaborate about some of those points, so it was just some introductory remarks.
Sorry, the provocation.
Yeah, the provocation.
The floor is open now for comments and questions, or even you're welcome to comment earlier speakers and discussions that we have had today.
I just wanted to say, I think it's well worded, and in very few words he has put the whole thing.
Yeah.
I was just recalling that as a student of philosophy and metaphysics, when we are using these terms in the West, we do not see what meaning the Eastern or the traditional society will take. I think the distinction between religious and secular does not hold in traditional society, because every secular thing is sacred at its roots, says Iqbal. Second thing I would like to say, for instance, the concept of illiteracy. When you put this concept of illiteracy to the traditional society, a woman who manages hundreds of her children, sons, daughters, neighbors. She is unlettered, but she is the epitome of primordial wisdom. Just calling her illiterate creates a gulf between understanding a traditional society. So my point of view, in extension to what I said, was that whenever we are using words in the Western society for any Eastern or Far Eastern society, we must understand the sensitivity and the actual metaphysical status of that society. Thank you.
Jan?
Yeah, it's a very interesting example here of how using particular words across cultural boundaries actually leads to radically different understandings on either side of that conversation. Now, you have previously in your own contribution and now in reaction to Safed's protested the use of the word illiterate. You prefer unlettered. Now, illiterate means unlettered in its etymological origins, and it is really that illiterate has assumed over time a burden of meanings which aren't there in the original. Now, I'd reverse that and say that's exactly what's happened with the term secular. Secular has assumed across the conversational divide, secular has assumed meanings which originally were not there. There's a Lebanese Muslim political scientist who has suggested that to get away from that imprisoned discourse, that one in Arabic, for example, should drop the Arabic word for it, Almani, and one presumably therefore in Urdu even more strongly should drop the term la dini, meaning secular, which is a complete misunderstanding of the term, and that instead taking, and that's where interesting gets back to your point, the modern, I was just about to block my copy and say Islamist, I won't. The modern, strongly insistent Islamic political discourse insists on Islam is one. Islam is deen wa dunya. Now, at one level, the fact that you can even distinguish conceptually between deen and dunya suggests that it is that there is a distinction, that there are those two distinct concepts. But within the Islamic discourse, they exist parallel to each other as contrasting elements of the same underlying, if you want to go metaphysical. And he then suggests, drop the term Ilmani, and let's have a discussion about dini wa dunyawi. And then we can get to the substance of the discussion instead of getting caught in these vocabularies which have been loaded with meanings which are very, very different on the two sides of the conversation.
Just one, I will just take 1 minute. Very good point which he has raised, but with one reservation. In the Quran, there is no distinction of dunya and deen. There is only distinction of dunya and akhirah. And all those religious scholars of Islam who use the word deen and dunya, they do not understand this polarization. In the whole Quran, which is the basis of the scripture, which is the scripture of the Muslim, it is said, Rabbana atina fi dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirah. And even the word deen has no sacredness. Even the people who are not following the deen are also called deendar. For instance, in the Quran, Qul ya ayyuhal kafiruna, there is the last line.
Yes.
Lakum dinudum, lakum dinudum, your way is for you, our way is for us. The question is that
But
here,
today I have completed your deen for you. Now, what do you do with that?
no, that the point is,
The meaning of
you have raised a very good question. The point is that deen comprises the wholeness of man. Iqbal says that it is not a departmental affair. It's not a departmental affair. It is the expression of the whole man. Unfortunately, because we have gone through the Western experience of bifurcating church from the state, so we cannot visualize that when Quran says of deen, he does not mean in parts and he does not leave anything. Idea, word, deed, your speech, anything covers deen. So your point helps us also. I just wanted to raise this reservation that in Islam and in the Quran, there is no distinction between Deen and Dunya. They are not polarizations, they are not poles apart, because Deen has the aspects of this life and afterlife. Thank you.
To which I have to raise another objection.
Okay.
Sorry. Islam and the Quran are, in historical fact, two different things.
Yes.
Islamic history is pervaded with pseudo-church structures and a distinction between state, between the secular, and between the religious. You can't escape, but whatever the Quran says, you can't escape that through Islamic history, this has actually been the case. And a lot of the insistence of modern Islamic political movements that it's all one is a rebellion against that historical past.
I think we don't defend our history, because if something, no, he's right.
I'm a historian.
No, you are right. You're right. If anybody has fallen from the tradition, there is no way. For instance, we people also, for instance, whenever our ulema talk of the distinction, polarization between Deen and Dunya, we stand up and say that there is no polarization. And if something has gone wrong in the Muslim history, we critically see that Muslim history. Because for us, the book of God is the final authority which gives us a criterion of right and wrong. And the conduct of one individual or humanity, we critically examine that.
In other words, Islamic history is not necessarily Islamic.
Yep.
Muslim history.
Muslim.
Oh, you want to come in here?
Yeah.
Let Sefil first, and because he's the speaker, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that the Deen contains two aspects, this world and the afterlife. So again, we have two dimensions, two aspects of the Deen. But the point was not to discuss different aspects of Deen, but to discuss the exactly epistemological consequence of the Tawheed. And Nur Kulish said that secularism or secularity as an approach and dimension of the rational interpretation, not as an ideology.